The alarm clock rang at 0430 hours, but Sarah was already awake. She had spent the night reviewing emergency procedures and weapon system operations in her mind. Today's evaluation would determine whether she became the first woman to successfully complete F-16 training or whether she joined the list of candidates who fell short of the demanding standards. The squadron briefing room buzzed with quiet conversation as pilots prepared for the day's missions. Sarah reviewed her mission card one final time, memorizing target coordinates and threat positions. Her evaluator would be Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Wells, a senior pilot with over 3,000 hours in fighter aircraft. Colonel Wells had a reputation for fairness, but also for maintaining the highest standards. Sarah appreciated that her final check ride would be conducted by another woman. Colonel Wells had broken barriers herself, becoming one of the first women to fly combat missions after the ban was lifted. She understood the unique pressures that female pilots faced, but she would not allow sympathy to influence her evaluation. During the pre-flight briefing, Colonel Wells outlined the mission profile. They would fly a complex air-to-ground attack scenario followed by air-to-air combat against simulated enemy fighters. Sarah would serve as flight lead, responsible for mission planning, threat analysis, and tactical decision-making. The scenario was designed to test every skill she had developed during months of intensive training. Sarah walked through her mission planning methodically. She identified potential threats along the ingress route and selected tactics to minimize exposure. She calculated fuel requirements and determined alternate targets in case the primary objective was heavily defended. Her briefing was professional and thorough, demonstrating the analytical skills required of fighter pilots. The walk to the aircraft felt different than previous training flights. Media representatives waited near the flight line, hoping to document this historic moment. Sarah had requested that coverage be minimal until after her evaluation was complete. She didn't want external pressure to affect her performance, but she understood the significance of what she was attempting to accomplish. Pre-flight inspection revealed her F-16 in perfect condition. Sarah checked every system carefully, knowing that mechanical problems could compromise her evaluation. The aircraft maintenance crews had worked overtime to ensure everything functioned properly. They understood the importance of this flight and took personal pride in supporting her historic attempt. Strapping into the ejection seat, Sarah felt the familiar weight of her helmet and oxygen mask. The cockpit displays came alive as she activated various systems. Each switch and button had become second nature through countless hours of practice. The F-16 was no longer an unfamiliar machine. It had become an extension of her own capabilities. Engine start proceeded normally, the single turbofan spooling up to idle power with its characteristic whine. Sarah completed her before-taxi checklist efficiently while monitoring radio communications from the control tower. Other aircraft were preparing for various training missions, but none carried the historical significance of her evaluation flight. Taxiing to the runway, Sarah felt the aircraft's eagerness to fly. The F-16 was designed for speed and maneuverability, not for ground operations. Its lightweight construction and powerful engine made it feel alive even while moving slowly on the taxiway. Sarah's confidence grew as she handled the aircraft with practiced ease. Tower clearance came through her headset. Falcon 01, winds 270 at 15, cleared for takeoff. Sarah acknowledged the clearance and advanced the throttle to military power. The F-16 accelerated rapidly down the runway, reaching takeoff speed in seconds. As the aircraft lifted off, Sarah felt the familiar surge of excitement that accompanied every fighter flight. The initial phase of her evaluation involved basic aircraft handling and formation flying with Colonel Wells. Sarah demonstrated smooth control inputs and precise positioning while maintaining constant radio communication. Her situational awareness remained sharp as she monitored airspace for other aircraft while staying focused on the evaluation requirements. Navigation to the target area tested her ability to manage multiple tasks simultaneously. Sarah tracked their position using both GPS and traditional navigation techniques while monitoring threat warning systems. She briefed Colonel Wells on tactical considerations and verified that all weapons systems were functioning properly. Approaching the simulated target area, Sarah began the most challenging portion of her evaluation. She had to identify and attack ground targets while avoiding simulated surface-to-air missile sites. The scenario required careful timing and precise execution. One mistake could result in mission failure or simulated aircraft loss. Sarah rolled into her attack dive, pickle button ready to release simulated weapons. The target grew larger in her heads-up display as altitude decreased rapidly. At the precise moment, she pulled the trigger, sending simulated ordnance toward the target. Her delivery parameters were perfect. The computer showed direct hits on the intended objective. Recovery from the attack dive tested her G-tolerance and aircraft handling skills. Sarah pulled back on the stick, feeling tremendous forces press her into the ejection seat. Her vision narrowed slightly as blood pooled in her lower body, but her anti-G suit and conditioning kept her conscious and alert. The F-16 climbed rapidly away from the target area, mission accomplished. Colonel Wells radioed her assessment of the attack phase. Good hits, proper dive angle, smooth recovery. Ready for air-to-air phase. Sarah felt a surge of confidence, but remained focused on the challenges ahead. The air-to-air portion would test her combat maneuvering skills against simulated enemy fighters. The adversary aircraft appeared on Sarah's radar scope at maximum detection range. She analyzed their formation and approach angle while developing her tactical plan. Multiple bogies required careful prioritization. She had to engage the most dangerous threats first while maintaining awareness of all contacts. Sarah selected her first target and prepared to engage with simulated air-to-air missiles. The geometry was critical. She needed to position herself for an optimal shot while avoiding defensive maneuvers by the enemy aircraft. Her training in aerial combat maneuvering had prepared her for exactly this scenario. Fox 3, she called over the radio, indicating a simulated missile launch. The training computer calculated hit probability based on range, aspect angle, and aircraft performance parameters. Her shot was perfect, resulting in a simulated kill against the lead adversary fighter. The remaining enemy aircraft maneuvered aggressively to avoid Sarah's follow-up attacks. She found herself in a complex dogfight, pulling high G-forces while tracking multiple targets. Her aircraft handling skills were tested to their limits as she attempted to gain advantageous positioning. Colonel Wells observed Sarah's performance carefully, noting her ability to maintain situational awareness while executing demanding maneuvers. Sarah's communication remained clear and professional even while pulling crushing G-forces. She demonstrated the mental toughness required to function effectively in high-stress combat situations. After several minutes of intense maneuvering, Sarah achieved firing position on the second adversary aircraft. Her simulated missile shot resulted in another kill, leaving only one enemy fighter remaining. The final engagement tested her energy management skills as both aircraft performed demanding maneuvers at the edge of their performance envelopes. Sarah's superior training and preparation became evident during the final engagement. She anticipated her opponent's moves and positioned herself advantageously while conserving airspeed and altitude. Her final missile shot eliminated the remaining threat, completing the air-to-air phase successfully. The flight back to base gave Colonel Wells time to compile her evaluation. Sarah had performed exceptionally well in all phases of the mission. Her technical skills were outstanding, but, more importantly, she had demonstrated the judgment and decision-making ability required of fighter pilots. During the approach and landing phase, Sarah executed a perfect overhead pattern followed by a smooth touchdown. Her aircraft handling throughout the evaluation had been flawless. She had proven that gender was irrelevant when it came to flying high-performance military aircraft. After engine shutdown, Sarah sat quietly in the cockpit for a moment. She had given her absolute best effort during the evaluation flight. Whether it was sufficient would be determined by Colonel Wells' assessment. But Sarah knew she had nothing left to prove to herself. Colonel Wells approached Sarah's aircraft as she completed her post-flight inspection. The senior pilot's expression was serious, but not disapproving. She had observed exceptional performance during every phase of the evaluation. Sarah had exceeded the minimum standards required for F-16 qualification. The formal debriefing would come later, but Colonel Wells offered immediate feedback. Outstanding performance throughout, she said. Your technical skills are excellent, and Your tactical awareness is superior to many experienced pilots. You've demonstrated that you belong in this aircraft." Sarah felt overwhelming relief mixed with pride. Months of intensive preparation had culminated in this moment. She had proven that women could meet the demanding standards required of fighter pilots. More importantly, she had opened the door for others who would follow in her path. Word of her success spread quickly through the squadron. Fellow pilots who had initially questioned her presence now offered genuine congratulations. They had witnessed her dedication and professionalism throughout the training program. Her performance had earned their respect and acceptance. The media representatives who had waited patiently near the flight line now had their historic story. Sarah would become the first woman to successfully complete F-16 training, breaking a barrier that many thought would never fall. Her achievement would inspire countless young women to pursue careers in military aviation. That evening, Sarah called her father to share the news. He had supported her dreams even when others said they were impossible. His pride was evident in his voice as she described her successful evaluation flight. The little girl who had watched air shows with wonder had become a qualified fighter pilot. Sarah understood that her achievement represented just the beginning. She would face continued scrutiny as she progressed through her operational assignments. Some would always question whether standards had been lowered to accommodate her success. She would answer those doubts through continued professional excellence. The path ahead would bring new challenges and responsibilities. Sarah would eventually fly combat missions, protecting American interests around the world. She would prove that women could perform effectively in the most demanding military roles. Her success would encourage others to pursue their own ambitious dreams regardless of traditional barriers. The morning sun cast long shadows across Nellis Air Force Base as Captain Sarah Mitchell walked toward the flight line. Her flight suit felt different today, not because it was new, but because she knew this would be her final chance to prove herself worthy of the F-16 Fighting Falcon program. Around her, male pilots chatted casually about weekend plans and upcoming missions. They nodded politely when she passed, but she could feel their doubt like a weight in the air. Sarah had dreamed of flying fighter jets since she was 8 years old, watching air shows with her father. Back then, women weren't allowed in combat roles. The closest she could get was becoming a transport pilot or flying cargo planes. But everything changed in 1993 when Congress lifted the ban on women in combat aircraft. Sarah was among the first to volunteer, knowing she would face scrutiny that her male counterparts never would. The path to this moment had been brutal. Flight school pushed every pilot to their limits, but Sarah faced additional challenges. Instructors questioned whether she had the physical strength to handle high-G maneuvers. Fellow trainees whispered that standards were being lowered to accommodate women. Some openly said women lacked the killer instinct needed for air-to-air combat. Sarah responded by outworking everyone. While others relaxed in the evenings, she studied flight manuals and practiced emergency procedures. She spent extra hours in the simulator, running through every possible scenario until her responses became automatic. Her grades were consistently at the top of her class, but she knew that wouldn't be enough. She had to be perfect. The F-16 program represented the ultimate test. These single-seat fighters were the Air Force's premier air superiority aircraft. They required split-second decision-making, exceptional hand-eye coordination, and the ability to withstand crushing physical forces. The selection process was notoriously difficult. Even experienced pilots failed to make the cut. Sarah's commanding officer, Colonel Robert Hayes, had been reluctant to recommend her for the program. During their meeting, he expressed concerns about unit cohesion and the distraction her presence might cause. He worried that other pilots would be protective rather than focused on the mission. Sarah listened respectfully, then asked for a chance to prove his concerns were unfounded. The preliminary testing began with psychological evaluations. Military psychologists probed every aspect of Sarah's mental toughness. They asked about her motivation for pursuing such a dangerous career. They questioned whether she understood the life and death nature of aerial combat. Some sessions felt more like interrogations than assessments. Physical testing came next. The centrifuge spun candidates at forces that simulated high-G combat maneuvers. Many experienced pilots couldn't handle the sustained pressure. Sarah had prepared for this by following a rigorous fitness regimen developed by former fighter pilots. She studied breathing techniques used by astronauts and practiced meditation to maintain focus under extreme stress. During her centrifuge runs, Sarah maintained consciousness and control while pulling forces that left some male candidates unconscious. The technicians seemed surprised by her performance, checking their equipment multiple times. She completed every required maneuver within acceptable parameters, but she could see doubt in their faces. They expected her to fail, and her success seemed to frustrate rather than impress them. The academic portion tested knowledge of aircraft systems, weapons capabilities, and tactical doctrine. Sarah had spent months memorizing technical specifications and studying historical air battles. She analyzed successful combat missions and identified factors that determined victory or defeat. Her scores were among the highest in the program's history. Flight training represented the true test. Sarah would fly increasingly complex missions in actual F-16 aircraft under the guidance of experienced instructors. Every mistake would be documented and analyzed. There was no room for error. She knew that standards that might be overlooked in male students would be magnified in her case. Her first instructor, Major Tom Crawford, had trained dozens of fighter pilots over his career. He was known for his demanding standards and direct communication style. During their initial briefing, he made it clear that he wouldn't make allowances for her gender. She would meet the same standards as every other pilot, or she would fail. Sarah appreciated his honesty. She didn't want special treatment. She wanted the chance to prove herself on equal terms. During pre-flight inspections, Major Crawford tested her knowledge of every system. He asked technical questions that would challenge experienced pilots. Sarah answered each one correctly, demonstrating the depth of her preparation. Their first flight together was a basic orientation mission. Sarah had flown military aircraft before, but nothing compared to the F-16. The single engine produced enormous thrust, pressing her back into the ejection seat during takeoff. The aircraft responded to her slightest input, requiring a delicate touch that took time to master. Major Crawford observed her every move through the mission. He noted how she handled the aircraft during various maneuvers, how quickly she processed information from multiple instruments, and how she communicated during radio calls. Sarah focused on flying smoothly and precisely, knowing that any sign of uncertainty would be remembered. After landing, Major Crawford provided detailed feedback. He pointed out areas where her technique could improve and praised aspects of her performance that met professional standards. His evaluation was fair, but demanding. Sarah appreciated the honest assessment, knowing that sugarcoating her progress would ultimately hurt her chances of success. Subsequent flights grew progressively more challenging. Sarah practiced air-to-air combat maneuvers, learning to track enemy aircraft while avoiding incoming missiles. She flew low-level penetration missions, navigating at high speeds just above the terrain. Each exercise tested different aspects of her skills while building confidence in the aircraft's capabilities. The other pilots in her training class began to take notice. Initially skeptical about her presence, they gradually developed respect for her abilities. She never complained about the physical demands of flight training. She studied harder than anyone else and consistently performed well during challenging missions. Most importantly, she proved she could be trusted as a wingman. Trust was everything in fighter aviation. Pilots depended on their wingmen to protect them during combat. A moment's hesitation or poor judgment could result in death. Sarah understood this responsibility and worked to demonstrate her reliability. During formation flights, she maintained precise positioning even in turbulent weather. During simulated combat exercises, she provided effective support for her flight lead. The final phase of training would determine whether Sarah earned her place in the F-16 program. She would face comprehensive evaluations covering every aspect of fighter pilot skills. The standards were absolute. There was no partial credit for good intentions. Either she met the requirements or she didn't. As Sarah prepared for these final tests, she reflected on the journey that brought her to this point. She had faced skepticism, discrimination, and enormous pressure to prove herself worthy. Some had tried to discourage her from pursuing such an ambitious goal. Others had questioned whether women belonged in combat roles at all. But Sarah had persisted because she believed in her abilities and her mission. She wanted to serve her country at the highest level possible. She wanted to prove that gender was irrelevant when it came to defending freedom and protecting American interests. Most importantly, she wanted to open doors for future generations of women who shared her dreams of military aviation. The night before her final evaluation, Sarah walked out to the flight line one more time. The F-16s sat silent under the stars, their sleek forms representing the pinnacle of American air power. Tomorrow, she would either join the ranks of fighter pilots or see her dreams end in disappointment. Sarah touched the side of her assigned aircraft, feeling the smooth metal under her fingertips. This machine could fly at twice the speed of sound and engage enemies at ranges exceeding 50 miles. It represented decades of technological advancement and billions of dollars in development costs. More importantly, it symbolized the trust that the American people placed in their military defenders. She had worked toward this moment for years, sacrificing social opportunities and enduring constant scrutiny. Tomorrow would reveal whether her efforts had been sufficient. Sarah felt nervous but confident. She had prepared as thoroughly as possible and demonstrated her capabilities throughout the training program. The evaluation would test everything she had learned. She would fly complex combat scenarios against experienced adversary pilots. She would demonstrate her ability to employ weapons systems accurately while managing multiple threats. Most importantly, she would prove that she belonged in the cockpit of America's premier fighter aircraft. As Sarah walked back toward the dormitory, she thought about the young girls who might be inspired by her success. If she could break through the barriers that had prevented women from flying fighters, perhaps future generations would face fewer obstacles in pursuing their dreams. The responsibility felt enormous, but Sarah was ready to carry that weight. Her alarm would sound in just a few hours, beginning the most important day of her military career. Everything she had worked for would be decided by her performance in a single evaluation flight. Sarah had done everything possible to prepare for this moment. Now she would discover whether it was enough to change history.